Now let's take a look at using vectors out in some code. And understand that what I'm going to show you here with vectors applies to all the other 6 containers and their subcontainers. But vector will just kind of whet your appetite and let you see what's going on here and the power of these things as opposed to just basic arrays. Okay, now I've created a project out there called Vector Example, and then I added a vexx page in here, and so you can find this in your work files folder, and yours is going to be more elegantly commented. Okay, in the one that's on there I've got a lot more comments. It could be slightly different than what I do here, depends on what I finally end up getting in there, but this is going to really help you get your head around how you can use these various containers. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do, understand that to run these we're going to create functions up here, okay, and then in our sub main here, or not sub main but our function main, I'm still stuck in the old basic days, guys. We're going to just call that example. Okay, so notice we'll just call example 1 down here, and then we'll just, when we run it, this will run and cause this code to run, and then we'll be done. Alright, now notice what I've done here. When I created my project, I included IO streams so that I can send things out to the console. I included vector so we can actually use that vector, and then I'm using standard vector, and this is from the standard template library. Okay, so you'll have to include those up there. Well, the first thing let's do something very simple here. Let's create a vector. So we'll put the keyword vector, and then we just tell it, by the way, I want a vector of integers, and I want to call this VTC. Alright, and that's pretty straightforward, right? And then I can start to do some really cool things with these, and the first thing I want to show you is, and you'll see a lot here about why these things are so cool, is how we can start to work with these vectors in a programmatic way, a lot more efficiently, and just a cooler, better way of living and working with these as opposed to arrays. So what I'm going to do here is create the example in a way that it makes sense to you, and we can read it when we start to output it to the console. Okay, and VTC contains, and so what I'm going to do here, this is the first thing, and this will open your eyes on vectors. Notice we created a vector here called VTC, so now I'm going to use the vector, and I type VTC, and when I hit the period, notice what comes up. We've got all these methods here: assign, at, back, begin, capacity, cend. We're going to use at, by the way, a little bit later on in some code. Erase, probably use that one, and then there's insert size, we'll use that one. So we'll play with a lot of these here. So we're going to call the size so that we can see how many elements are in that array. Okay, not the values, but just how many elements are out there. Okay, very simple example, not a lot going on here. We're just going to create a vector, and then we're going to look and see what size it is. Okay, now obviously there's not going to be any elements, but we'll take a look at this anyway. So I will build this, and then we will jump out there and take a look at it. Okay, and so what I will do is jump out here, and I'm going to show you here that well, let me clear this off and show you. Let me go back through this and make sure. To find what I just compiled, if I go into my documents and go into Visual Studio 2010, then into my projects, you will see the vector example. And if I look in the debug folder, that's where mine are going. There's my executable. So I just want to back up, hold down Shift, right click on that in Windows 7, and I get this open command window here. And now I can just type vector example, because that's where that executable is. Now notice, there's my output. Let's look at why we got that. There's my output right there. Example 1, VTC contains 0 elements, and this is where that came from. Okay, so the VTC size right here is showing us that there's 0 elements in there. All right, and so let's clear that off so we can come back to it later. Now let's take another look. Let's do it a little bit differently. Instead of just calling it straight up like that, let's do a second example. Alright, and with this one we are going to take the same vector instantiation, and notice scope's going to take care of these for us. And this time, instead of creating it like that, we'll tell it to add 3 elements to it when it brings it up. Okay? And so now again, we're going to check the size of this. And I will do that right there. And I'm going to change this to example 2 so that we can see that we're looking at that. Okay? And let's see if there's anything else we want to do. Now let's stick with this for right now. And so I will compile that. We'll let that compile up, and then we will jump out to the console. We're still in the same place, and I will grab my old command, and notice VTC contains 0 elements, and you know what I did. Some of you guys are already screaming, hey, wait a minute, you're not calling your second example. Does that make sense here? In the main, I had to call this example to tell it to run that one. Okay, never mind if your instructor gets lost. Okay. I'll eventually catch up, I promise. Okay, so let's run. There it is. Let's run vector example again. Notice example 1 tells us that the size is 0. Okay, but then with example 2, notice we instantiated it with 3 elements, and then when we ran our size right here on the second example, it now contains 3 elements. Now, keep in mind, don't let me confuse you here. These aren't the same. Okay, these are 2 separate vectors because we went out of scope between the 2 functions. Okay, so anyway, that's a good introduction. Now join me in part 2, and we'll do some other things with this vector.